next 30 years.
Why do you think that is? What happened? What changed?
In in our studies, red, white, and black, we looked at the experiences. We looked at 6 major plantations to find out what the state of marriage was of slaves. 75% of those slaves had a man or woman raising children. The nuclear family continued to prosper in the face of segregation for 100 years. But all of that changed in the 60s with the poverty bill.
Johnson.
Yes. Johnson came in, and what happened was the social scientists who were pushing socialism on America, Fowler and Piven at Columbia, said if you disconnect work from income, then school dropout rates will increase, drug addiction, all of those things. And so what the government did was offer welfare as an alternative to a man in the house. We relaxed the rules, we separated work from income, and as a consequence, that was supported by the Black Power movement. Also, the women's movement was anti-man. And so you had a combination of social policy, but policy alone wasn't enough. The federal government enticed welfare, black people on welfare. Welfare used to be stigmatized in the black community, but the federal government began to interpret it as reparations and as entitlements. They withdrew any requirement that you should tell the paternity of the father, of the paternity in cases of pregnancy. All of these, so that more blacks came into the welfare system in the first 5 years of the 70s. That millions flooded into the system at a time when the unemployment rate was under 4%. So it is a combination of social policies plus the civil rights movement morphed into a race grievance industry, and many of those civil rights leaders became mayors and elected to public office, where we spent $22 trillion during that period on programs to aid the poor, where 70 cents of every dollar went not to the poor, but those who served the poor.
What percentage of it?
70%.
70% of the 22 trillion went to the people that serve the poor.
They asked which problems are fundable, not which problems are solvable. So in other words, a friend of mine described it this way: he's having a cabin built in Wisconsin. His electrician is a drunk, and the carpenter is an alcoholic and has one leg. Their value to him is their skills. But if he was a disabilities director, their value to him would only be the disability. So we have a situation where we have really created a commodity out of poverty.
And by the way, when you're saying these numbers, what it makes me think about is this. So why, if you go back 1940s, only 4% of kids that were born in America are to a single mother.
Right.
Okay? That increased from 4% to 40%. Okay. And the numbers are staggering. What's up today? Specifically in 70% of blacks and different communities. Why do you think this happened? And if you were to say, well, here's how we can get away from this. This is how to fix it. So one, why did it happen? How do we get here? Two, how would you fix it?
Well, first of all, we got here because we had the social policy that incentivized single parents. In other words, I had a young couple. She said that my husband's a janitor and I'm a secretary, and he lost his job. She said, I applied for welfare as a married couple and they refused me. But she said, if I was a single mother, then I can get help. And so you really provide a disincentive for marriage, and you wonder why you get it. You get more of what you reward and less of what you punish. And so over those decades, we have punished single parent households. The more you work, the more in other words, the more you work, the more perverse incentives for you. If I work and get a raise, I'm going to lose child care. So that's why we have a system that disincentivizes work and marriage.
And you had certain politicians that would use that, but they would spin it for votes. Oh, we're paying poor women to have kids. You would hear that in political speeches. I'm going to change that. We're paying poor women to have kids, and it made it sound like that the poor women were the problem. Right. That they're just taking advantage of it. When you go back and what you're talking about, I think it's important to look at Lyndon Johnson and remember when they were saying the Great Society, it was Great Society for who? Because the government was our government has been actually pretty bad at getting Americans to move and change. They're pretty good at getting us upset, but they really don't get Americans, if you look at history, to really move and change. Our government has never really led, but our government has been excellent at being a catalyst of where they want us to go and to let us go. And to your point, They create this catalyst. You know, what they say with explosive. The explosive isn't the problem, it's the catalyst you put in explosive, so always keep those guys separate. Government has been the catalyst, and what you're talking about is what they did is they knew what they were doing, and they knew that these things would be a catalyst of changing behavior because they couldn't stand at the pulpit of government and demand that you change, but they could put things out there and sit back and watch, and that's what you're saying.
Right, but I also realize that you question what are solutions. If you say that 70% of those families are raising children that are dropping out of school, it means 30% are not. What we do at the Woodson Center is we go into low-income communities. We go into the homes of the 30% to find out what is going on in those households. These are people who are raising children that are not dropping out of school, they're not in jail, they're not on drugs. They're confronted with the same economic circumstances, but and so the question is, what is it that's going on there?
Right,
that's
the success leaves clues.
Yes.
Yes.
So that's why I fault conservatives also, is that they have been preoccupied when it comes to poverty, but only studying failure. Charles Murray and some of the others, all they do is talk about, okay, if people on welfare, let's take away the perverse incentives. I'm for work requirements. I'm for drug testing, but you can't stop there. What we do at the Woodson Center is that we go look for capacity. And so many of the people in the 30%, we need to hold them up and take what works for the 30% and expand it to the 70%, and that's what we do. But it's a moral and spiritual crisis, and it is not an economic and social crisis. But policy, be the left or right of center, takes very little into account of restoration, moral redemption, faith. And many of our kids who have been able to survive under the worst of slavery is because of their faith. But the whole issue of faith is not even a factor in supporting people's restoration. We have gone into some of the most drug-infested, crime-ridden neighborhoods where there were 53 gang murders in the 5 square block area 25 years ago, DC. We supported 5 young men who were ex-offenders who came to Christ and became redeemed. But they had the moral authority and the social trust of their peers. And so they went into these neighborhoods and brought the leadership of these kids who were doing destructive things. And they became agents of demoralization of these kids. And it's just like in the marketplace, only 3% of the people are entrepreneurs. They generate 70% of the jobs, right? Well, a lot of these organizations are social entrepreneurs. It only takes a small number of them. If you can change them and make them agents of a restoration, they can change the whole community. And we found that to be the case in this community called Benning Terrace. By just going in and reaching 16 kids who were leading predators and changing their values and their attitudes.
How do you do that?
By witnessing to them. You take some man who has been in jail, who has faced all the challenges from an abused household, saying, you were not defined by the works of what you were. And I'm a witness that you don't have to stay there because you've been there.
Where did the self-help mindset come from? Where did the self-help mindset come from?
By looking at what we did in the past. In other words, what I've done by learning, if our people could, in the face of slavery and discrimination, build families and restore their communities, then all we've got to do is go back and take the values that serve the interests of our people then and apply them today. In other words, taking old values and apply them to new realities, with the consequence that you can. But a witness is more powerful than an advocate, and experience will always prevail against an argument. I debated this with Hawk Newman. It's on YouTube for 1 hour. I didn't argue with him. I confronted his proposition with my facts and saying, if we were able to learn and close the education gap under segregation, why can't we do it today? And so that's what you have. But we don't realize the power of somebody coming to a young man or young woman who has been engaged in antisocial behavior. Supply them with a mentor that witnesses to them to say, why don't you use your skill and talents to rebuild the community and not tear it down?
So if you like this clip and you want to watch another one, click right here. And if you want to watch the entire podcast, click right here.
Mental health effects of the current protocol